Good evening and welcome to Wednesdays with the Mayor. I'm Dennis Bragg. We're here at the Missoula Public Library with Mayor Jordan Hess. Jordan, good to see you again on
Good
this
to see you, Dennis.
Lovely, now almost summer evening, I think, as we get going. I want to thank everybody for joining us on the live stream. I want to thank the crew from MCAT for providing all of the technical service and details and those kinds of things. Don't forget these are available on the YouTube MCAT channel too, and after the fact you can always go back and refer to those. We are taking call-ins, so if you have a question, if you're watching at home, that number is 406-546-7692, 546-7692. We do have, for the folks that are here, we have some cards in the back on the table there, so if you want to jot down your questions, that helps as well. And we do have some coffee and water, and I think a few cookies left, although those are going fast, so we'll see. Hopefully what will be left for us when we're done.
Hopefully.
Jordan, tonight we're going to be talking about mountain water, which is one of my favorite topics. It was a legendary knockdown legal fight, and of course I guess we just marked an anniversary with mountain water here just this week, right?
Yeah, so on June 22nd, we closed in 6 years with the water system under public ownership, and that was on top of a multi-year legal fight, and so really it's been 10 years since that legal fight was initiated, and just a lot to show for the system now 6 years into public ownership.
I want to set the stage a little bit in case folks don't know some of the background, just a thumbnail sketch on Mountain Water. Of course, Mountain Water was a local company initially, ran the water system for decades. Things kind of started to change a little bit in the 1980s. The city attempted to take over the system and acquire it at that point, a big lawsuit back in 1988. And that was rejected, and so then we continued with Mountain Water. And then along about the mid-2000s, I always never know how to refer to that period, 2008, 9, 10, right in there, a group called the Carlisle Group acquired Mountain Water. And that's where things began to change. Carlisle had bought a couple of water systems in California, but of course part of that was also to purchase Mountain Water. And that's where some of the rubs started to come in. And I know at the time when you came on the council, it was really ramping up, wasn't it?
Yeah. So I was elected to the council in November of 2013, and the council in late 2013 had made an offer to purchase then Mountain Water from Park Water Company, which was a subsidiary then of Carlisle, and there had been some agreements in place, or alleged agreements between Carlisle and the City of Missoula, where Carlisle represented that if the city would support the sale to Carlisle, that then they would be the first in line to buy the system later. They represented that they really weren't interested in owning the water in Montana. They were interested in the California systems, and that they would be a willing seller at the time, and that they would reasonably evaluate an offer. That turned out to be false, as was demonstrated.
And that was one of the initial things that was a real challenge with that, because Mayor Engen had a offline conversation with Carlisle, with executives, and that was the assurance was, well, if you support us and we're fine with this, then yeah, it'll be your chance, kind of that offer.
Yeah. And
of course, then that turned out to be a little bit of vaporware, as it turned out. So
the council in late 2013, made an offer to purchase the system for $65 million. That offer was rejected. When I joined the council, we made a second offer to purchase the system again, and that offer was also rejected. At that time, we voted to initiate a condemnation proceedings to basically force, and I get chills when it's probably one of the most important things I will have ever been a part of in my life. And anyway, we initiated the condemnation proceedings, and in the state of Montana, that's a two-step process. So the first is proving to the court that there's a public necessity. And that public necessity phase was a trial here in the 4th District Court under Judge Karen Townsend. And that trial was lengthy. It was hard fought. It was a multi-week trial here in the Missoula courthouse. And ultimately, Judge Townsend issued her preliminary order of condemnation, which set the stage for, or which determined that there was public necessity for public ownership. And that was really based on a number of factors, but it was the opinion of the judge, and later affirmed by the Montana Supreme Court multiple times, that there was public benefit and public necessity for ownership of the system. The next phase then was setting the value, and there's a process in Montana law to determine what the value of the asset is. And we went through that process and arrived on a value of $88 million and change for the system. And then there were some associated legal costs and transaction costs. And so we closed on the system in total for a little over $120 million in June of 2017. June 22nd, 2017 was the day that we got the keys to the system, as it were, and began pumping water as Missoula Water rather than as Mountain Water. Several things happened at that time. First of all, we got to start making good on our promises that we made to the community. We had promised all throughout the condemnation process that we would take care of the system, that we would improve capital investments in the system, that we would take care of employees, and that we would really treat this precious resource. Water is a precious resource in the West and throughout the world. That we would treat this precious resource with the stewardship that it deserved. So on June 22nd, every single Mountain Water employee, but for an executive, came over to the system, and I'm proud to say that our retention was absolutely phenomenal over those 6 years. I
always thought that was an interesting part that we didn't cover tremendously at the news. We covered a lot of the early concerns that the employees had about what was going to happen and things. But yeah, it was pretty remarkable to see after that 5 years basically of uncertainty and legal and everything that so many of them decided to stay with the organization.
Yeah,
that's pretty remarkable.
And when the when the employees became public employees, they took ownership in the system in a new way. There were stories of employees that were identifying problems in the system and going out and fixing those problems proactively, in a way that they did as ratepayers and as Missoulians and as, in a sense, member owners, if you will, of this new public company. And that was something that was just really, really wonderful to see how much ownership there was and how much people really took to being public employees. We also have made a number of improvements to the system over the years. So when we acquired the system, over half the water that was pumped never made it to the tap. Missoula has a really unique geology. We're in the lake bed of Glacial Lake Missoula, and we've got this gravel and boulder seafloor essentially,
right,
below us.
And
you can turn on a really high volume leak at a water main a few feet underground, and it just goes straight down.
It goes straight down.
In most soil types, that bubbles up really quickly, and you start seeing leaks. But in the Missoula Valley, that's not the case. So we have this leak rate that is compounded by the fact that the leaks don't get spotted, and compounded by really neglect and negligence by the prior owner. So. We replace water mains at a regular rate now, but we're routinely replacing water mains that are over 110 years old, and that's beyond the usable life of a water main. So when we acquired the system, the leakage rate was over 50%. A significant number of the water mains were over 100 years old, and there was just significant deferred maintenance. And on top of that, the money that was collected through the water rate was leaving our community in the form of profits to shareholders of the Carlyle Group. So we had a significant amount of money exiting the community, paying for essentially profits at the shareholder level, rather than being invested back into the system.
And that was really one of the crux points of the first trial, was really this question of deferred maintenance, how much. And I always remember one of the attorneys, the exhibits in this thing were interesting, a lot of photos and things, but I'll never forget the one attorney for Mountain Water for Carlisle holding up the rusty pipe. And I was thinking, that may not be making your case very well at the time, but it was very interesting to watch that interplay, and a lot of it was about that deferred maintenance and the leakage and the conditions of the system and how it had deteriorated over the years.
Yeah, absolutely. So that was something that we have actually just now been able to turn around after these 6 years of investment. So you invest in the system and you replace miles and miles of mains, but new leaks are forming in these, again, 100-year-old plus water mains, and so we're leaking about 4 billion gallons of water per year, and right around 10,000, just shy of 10,000 gallons per minute. Now this year we have finally turned the corner on leakage, where our leakage rate has reduced because of our capital investment. So our leakage rate is down about 1,100 gallons per minute, and that's a lot of water. First of all, 1,100 gallon. You picture like a 55-gallon drum, just for scale. That's a lot of water to have 20 of those. And so we've over these years we've invested $46 million in the system in water main replacement. We've replaced 8.7 miles of mains, and we've had that significant reduction in our leakage rate. That also has a huge climate impact. We're pumping a huge environmental and water quality benefit as well. When we pump water up and then it leaks down from the surface, from a water main that's a few feet underground, it picks up all of the surface pollutants and it carries them back down toward the aquifer. And so there's multiple layers of the aquifer in the Missoula Valley. There's our aquifer where our drinking water comes from. There's also some perched aquifers that are up higher, and there is an interchange between those aquifers over time. And so if we're pulling pollutants down into the aquifer, that ultimately will get into our drinking water. It's why we have such a focus on stormwater management in the city of Missoula, and it's why we have to be really diligent about what we dump down the storm drains. But it's the same theory really with basically it's like a giant storm drain to have a leak at the surface, and then bringing those pollutants down. So that's one aspect. The other is just the electricity and the chemicals. You're putting chlorine in the water to purify it. You're using electricity to run the pumps, and so if you're pumping 1,100 gallons a minute less water, that's a lot less electricity. So we're saving just shy of 600 megawatt hours a year of electricity. That's over $60,000 worth of electricity that we're saving by not pumping as much. So then, of course, we're purchasing less power that is fired from coal-fired plants or gas-fired plants. And we're, of course, reducing our impact in that way.
Let's talk about that water quality question. You brought that up before I forget about it, because that was one of the things that was central to some of those initial arguments. It was the leakage, but there was also this question of the future of our water. Mm-hmm. How was it going to be controlled? And I know a lot of the concerns at the time from some of the groups were really about, is Carlisle with these connections? There was talk about, taking it out for selling bottled water, mm-hmm. taking it to outside sources. And there was a lot of concern about retaining Missoula's water for growth. As you look at what's happened in the succeeding 5, 6 years, 10 years since the initial fight, how much more important is that question of controlling our water and the quality of it?
Well, it's extremely important. And I mean, you look at areas around the West that have had droughts. You look at you look at water scarcity around the world, and it is only increasing. And you look at, particularly around the American West, and the story of the Colorado River right now is a great teaching moment about how careful we need to be with water. Missoula is really fortunate. Our aquifer, because of this unique glacial lake bed geology, our aquifer is relatively plentiful, and it recharges at a relatively rapid rate. But it's not limitless, and we do need to conserve water. And the idea of a private equity firm bottling our water and selling it out of our area is just really distasteful. But it's also really not good for our community's future and our community's security of our ability to provide that resource. We very actively manage our water rights. So we have one thing that we got when we acquired the system was the associated water rights, and we manage those carefully. We have moved to relocate some of those to the west so that we're able to serve development out to the west. We also acquired the surface water rights, a lot of surface water rights in Rattlesnake Creek. So those involved, there's 10 wilderness dams up in the Rattlesnake Wilderness, and there was a dam that we removed on Rattlesnake Creek that was a diversion dam that was a former intake site as a backup water supply.
And I always loved the timing of that project, because literally the ink had barely dried on the check, and we were up a few weeks later at Rattlesnake announcing the plans to take that dam out. I mean, that was that was indicative of that responsiveness that we had under local control, right?
Absolutely, and great partners. The Clark Fork Coalition has been a great partner. Trout Unlimited was a great partner in the restoration of that Rattlesnake Creek flow, and that has benefits for bull trout habitat, for in-stream flows, for maintaining water temperature to support fish habitat. It has benefits for recreation benefits for those that are using the creek and hiking along the creek. And those in-stream flows have value.
There's also some safety concerns because that's a very old dam.
It was.
It had that impoundment pond behind there. Not a lot of water, but enough that could cause problems if we got into flooding situations.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Let's talk about just from your feeling looking back, and this David and Goliath story that was really unfolding in 2013 when that decision was made to pursue this. And I know the feeling at the time, there was a lot of discussion and debate in the community, like, can we afford to do this? Should we do it? There was a lot of concern about legal costs. As you look back on it now after 10 years, what goes through your mind when when I think of you as coming onto the council in the middle of this starting out?
Yeah.
How nervous were you, and how satisfied are you looking back now at where we ended up?
It was incredibly stressful at the time, and I have to give, the credit to this really belongs to Mayor Engen, who was steadfast through this. On council, there was a group of us that worked really hard to maintain a coalition on the city council, because there were times when it would have been a lot easier just to walk away from the process and to abandon the effort and to just throw in the towel and say, well, it's too hard. And that was something that there were times when members of the council wanted to do that. And being able to hold that coalition together and keep everyone on board and keep pushing forward. We did have an estimate at the beginning of the process that we'd have a couple $100,000 in legal fees, and that it would just progress relatively easily, and we ended up, the opponent, the private equity fund that we were up against was, truly was a David and Goliath situation. And we were, they did everything in their power to make this as expensive and difficult and challenging and time consuming as possible. And that was a deliberate effort to get us to be scared away from the process. And it didn't work. But, the legal fees were in excess of $14 million. And that was a function of how difficult and protracted the other side chose to make this. Those legal fees are, we get criticism about the cost of the legal fees, but I think it's important to note that the legal fees of acquisition are wrapped into the total acquisition cost, that 120 and change $1 million number that I mentioned. Those are wrapped into that total acquisition cost, and those are financed. We purchased bonds to finance those over the life, over a number of decades. And so part of when you pay your water bill, part of what it does is it pays for the employees, the water professionals that serve the community. It pays for the operating costs, the pumping and the treating and the distribution and whatnot. It also pays for all of the capital that we talked about, the investment in replacing water mains and whatnot. But a big portion of what your water bill pays for is this debt service for paying for the company. And that's something that is going to be in place, like I said, for a couple more decades here. But when those costs go away, that will be a perpetual benefit to the community that we had these couple decades where we were paying off the system. Mm-hmm. And I'll also note that our water rates right now, today in 2023, are actually less than they were when we initiated condemnation in 2014. So we're using water rates that are lower than when we initiated condemnation. We're doing more, we're delivering a better service, and we're doing it for less cost to the ratepayer.
I want to bring, we'll talk to Dale Bickle is here, because he was certainly, his spreadsheets were smoking there during that period, trying to figure all this out. I did want to mention our local legal team. It was astonishing to watch the work that they did against these essentially hired guns from Carlisle and the other groups. How impressive was that to watch? And we really give them a lot of credit for being quite legally savvy how to navigate this.
Yeah,
right?
it was great. We had a local team with Scott Stearns and Tasha Jones here from Boone Carlberg. They were completely invested in this as, it's their community too, and they care deeply about the community, and they worked so hard and so tirelessly and so thoughtfully and so strategically. And then we had a legal counsel, Harry Schneider, who was out of Seattle, and he was just a brilliant legal mind, and it was and a kind individual, and it was just fun to watch him. It was fun to watch him do this.
When he did his arguments, when the Supreme Court came here and we were over at University of Montana, masterful. I mean, he was not intimidated. He knew exactly what the case was, and I decided during this whole process too, if I ever get sued, I hope to never see Natasha on the other side of the table, because boy, I tell you, she was impressive, and Scott was as well. It was really remarkable to watch. A lot of people, you mentioned about the two parts to this too, and I want to go back to that for a minute, because obviously the big legal fight, the high profile piece, was that court hearing. I can recall we were over there for multiple days going through all those arguments. But the valuation process of this was a real critical part of this, wasn't it? Because we had it, but we had to get it for the right price. And
Yeah.
we had to prove that, right?
Yeah, and the process was really unique under state law, and I know Dale was really in the thick of this, but there's a valuation process that where there's three valuation commissioners, and they're selected one from each side, and then those commissioners select the third. And they go through a process, and they determine the value, and then that can be appealed, and there's a process. But that was a lot of discovery on our end. That's when we really learned a lot of the actual condition of the system and just how poor it was. We learned just how much things had been neglected. We learned that there were. As a private utility in the state of Montana, you get a guaranteed return on equity, and so it's a pretty good deal if you are investing in capital. You get a guaranteed return, and that's a way to provide incentive to the private market to actually improve the utilities. Well, Carlisle they were capitalizing assets like coffee machines. I mean, they were making guaranteed returns on things on all kinds of things.
Yeah.
So the ratepayers were buying a coffee machine plus 9.8%, and that's the sort of things we discovered during that valuation phase.
And just final point on that in the legal part, and then we'll move on. But the other thing too is there was a lot of associated kind of post-game lawsuits and maneuvering, PSC hearings. There was a lot that happened outside of Missoula County that we had to go and make our case as well. So that was a challenge. So, all right, we want to encourage people, if you're watching, again, you can call in with your questions, 406-546-7692, 546-7692. And again, we have some cards back there for questions. I want to get Dale in for just a minute, because I would like to talk about some of that long-term financial picture. Dale, of course, the CIO for the city. And Dale, why don't you come over here and we'll talk just for a second about that. And I want to mention, I had to check with Dale because I remember him coming right, not unlike Mayor Hess, coming right on board in the middle of all this as it was really ramping up. And what was going through your mind leaving Missoula County and coming into the middle of this fray anyway?
Well, it was remarkable. Actually, my first day at the City of Missoula was the day that the city filed its amended complaint, the official lawsuit for the condemnation, and that was part of the thing that attracted me to the city, is be able to work on something like that from my hometown. So yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about the bonds and a lot of the financial things. How big of a lift has that been, and how successful have we been? I know even as the trial was going on, even after we had won, there were a lot of questions about, okay, how's this long-term financial picture shake out? 6 years later, where are we at?
Yeah, so interesting enough, that was, during the first acquisition, we ended up doing two series of bonds to do this. We did the initial short-term bonds in order to get through acquisition, and that was because there was all of these. We didn't actually buy the system from the Carlisle group. We bought it from the subsequent purchaser, the Algonquin, and so our settlement agreement was them, and we had a deal. But there was all these legal contingencies still hanging out there, and it was difficult to talk to it would have been very difficult to go to the public market with a bond with these types of contingencies. So we were able to work with the bank that we had been working with all the time to do a private placement with them to take it out, and also do a reserve for all these contingencies, which ended up being that first series of bonds was about $140 million because of the contingencies. Soon as they were resolved, and they all resolved to the city's favor, we were able to issue bonds for the long-term takeout. And not only was that easy, I mean, it was remarkable the amount of interest they were. They were sold on the public market, and all the series sold out really quickly because it was a good size for investors. And it was paper from Montana that isn't on the market, so it helped with diversity. And it was a really, really strong sale.
Now, what happened to those short-term bonds? Is that still an outstanding? I mean, I lose track of the financial side of that.
Nope, those long-term bonds took those ones out, and so that was essentially a refinancing that at a lower interest rate and a lower principal, and actually at a better rate than we anticipated even during the trial. We were able to shorten the term and get a better interest rate at the time. So Mayor Hess says decades to come. We issued those bonds. We issued 20-year bonds in 2019, so we're already 5 years down the path there.
What was the amount on the long term off the top of your head, roughly?
It's actually they're $100 million bonds, but we did. There was a premium, so we borrowed about $120 million. That's what I was thinking.
I was thinking it was somewhere just over 100. So, and financially, of course, I remember a lot of the discussion at the city at the time. There was some concern from some of the public of what would this do to the city's bond rating? Can we continue to fix streets? Can we do other things that may be coming on? We had a lot of libraries being built and everything in that phase. How are we financially? What's our report card right now in our bond rating after all of this?
Yeah, we remain financially strong in all our areas. We have separate bond ratings, on the city as a whole, the general fund, and our two big utilities, the water utility and the wastewater utility. And all of those remain good, strong credits. I can't remember them off the top of my head, but we haven't had any financial issues, or we've issued the water utility because of the ability to use even with the purchase price and the legal fees, we still had quite a bit of capacity in the rate that we have today to do the capital investments that we're doing now. We more than tripled the capital investments, and our rate supports debt. We use a lot of debt financing, and we also have the opportunity to get a lot of interest rates that are only available to governments. So that just helps too.
And I know that was one of the concerns as you were putting these packages together. We were trying to develop these. We didn't want to build a rate in there that was so enormous that we'd never catch up.
Yeah, that's right. Right, and so it's been really great. I think the water utility has much more of the resources they need to be able to steer the ship. And then the other thing is just the connection. So Ross Molinaro here, who is our engineering manager, but it's the engineering manager for all of our public works divisions. So water, wastewater, stormwater, and streets. And so that means all of them work together. We have other projects. When we do a water main project, we're fixing the entire street. And all of those are other benefits that happen.
Great. Thank you, Dale. Appreciate it. That is a good point, Mayor, when we talk about that, isn't it? That the combination of utilities, when you've got the trench open, as the expression goes, to be able to go back in and tackle those other things, sidewalk, curb repair, other lines that may be in the vicinity, that's a huge part of this too, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So, in private ownership, it wouldn't have been uncommon to see a street be repaved by the city, and then a few years later, the trench dug up through the middle to replace a water main, and that's just it lacks efficiency. It's not sensible. It's not good coordinating, but it's the best we could do. And now we have the ability to coordinate between these departments. So we let's say we have 200-year-old water mains on parallel streets, and they both leak, the same gallons per minute. We can go in and say, okay, well, this street's in poorer condition, or this street lacks mature street trees or lacks sidewalks or whatever the factor may be, or is in a disadvantaged area that is poorly served by infrastructure and health outcomes, or whatever the service may be, and we can decide to invest in that area based on a set of criteria. So we can say we've got goals around public health, around equity, around climate, around housing. We can synthesize all of those goals and distill them down into actionable projects. So we'll do this project before we do this project. And that's something that we never had the ability to coordinate before we had the system.
In fact, I can recall during the trial watching Mountain Water quickly came back and their bosses said, well, we should probably do some work. And I can remember watching that and seeing them go around curbs and go around different things. I'm thinking, this probably isn't, and I'm a nobody, I don't know anything. But I was looking, I'm going, this, and I've since been out on the projects that the city has done under Missoula Water, and to watch that has been a much more interesting, more thorough approach to everything. So
Yeah.
with that, we should probably, Ross, do you want to come up for a second? And Ross is one of our city engineers, the city engineer, I guess now, right? All right, good. Well, let's talk about some of these improvements and what you're finding on the ground in terms of being able to go in and do these projects. First off, when you open something up and you get into those old systems, the mayor was talking about 100 years old. Those probably are not in too good a shape, are they?
No, that's very true. We have a lot of old pipes in the ground, and we're still working to replace them. There's actually, we call them invasion pipe, and it's actually a thin-walled steel pipe, and it's called invasion pipe because, so I've been told, it came back from Normandy, from the invasions of Normandy, and they had a surplus pipe, and they brought it back, and somehow it got sold in Missoula, and it's still called invasion pipe to this day. It's just a thin-walled steel pipe that should not be used as a water main pipe, really. And
Especially in this day and age.
So we're doing our best to get those pipes out of the ground and replace them with something better.
And I've noticed in watching the projects, we're really talking a variety of different pipe out there, right? It's some of the mains, it's different pieces. Talk a little bit about that network that you're working on.
Yeah, sure. The water distribution system is the mains in the street and the services that go to the houses. And the leakage does come from the services and the mains. And in Missoula, the city owns the mains and the homeowner owns the services. So we're doing the best we can to kind of identify where those leaks are and work with the homeowners. And we're trying to develop a more proactive program to start addressing some of the leaks on the services. So far to date, we've mainly been working on the leaks on the mains, but we're recognizing that that's only kind of half of the problem, and we're going to start trying to find other solutions for the services. The other thing I wanted to point out, talking about reinvesting in the system, is that we've over the last 4 years, we've been replacing the meters in people's houses.
Oh, yeah, let's talk about that.
Those are really cool. It's a new smart meter technology that just has a lot of advantages. The old meters have been failing, and they weren't easy to read, and our water service team has been awesome about slowly, and the city financing has been helping us. I mean, it's a very expensive proposition to replace all these meters, and we've been very proactively going into neighborhoods and trying to change out meters.
And those, tell me a little bit about those. Those are our smart meters, I guess they're called. Tell me a little bit about what are some of the features that can help not only the city, but obviously property owners.
Yeah, sure. I think we're optimistic that and sometime in the near future we'll be able to turn on a system that lets you see in real time your water use. So if you are, let's say you're a homeowner who's out of town and you all of a sudden you see your water use spike, you're going to know that maybe there's something going on you might want to get home for and check out to see if there's a leak. But so that's an advantage that the homeowner would see. The advantage to us is that it's just more, instead of having to drive a truck around, the old days we would drive a truck around and pick up a reading once a month, and that's what your bill was based off. Now we're getting data every 15 minutes or so.
And those, not too complicated to have those put in, too, from what I understand. It's a fairly straightforward process.
It's probably,
it is.
More, it is and it isn't. It depends on the site. It really depends on the one. Some of them are outside, and they're easy, and then some of them are, just an old house under a crawl space. Not always easy.
But that's where you want to work with folks, and if they've got an interest in that, it's a long conversion. It's not going to happen by the end of the year type.
Yeah. I wanted to say something too, that I joined the city right after the water utility was acquired, and it's just been really neat to see the whole progression. And I do absolutely believe that it's been a benefit to the city that we've invested so much more into the system. And the staff that came with Mountain Water staff that became Missoula Water staff was such an asset too, and it worked out so well for the city to keep all that talent and that knowledge. So.
And finally, a big thank you to I'm sure all the residents and people driving back and forth. We get these busy streets, especially 5th, 6th, those types of things. It takes a little patience, but it's all worthwhile.
Yeah, I definitely appreciate the public's patience with all these projects. And what you're saying about combining different projects, we have one right now on North Fifth that's a combined sidewalk and water main project, and we're trying to do both at the same time. So, yeah.
All right, Ross. Well, thank you very much. Thanks for coming in. Great information there about the pipe. That's interesting. I forgot about the invasion pipes. I remember hearing that story during the trial, and I was like, really, from Normandy? But that's the history of. That's not that unusual for a city of this age and this location. It was like, you put these systems together, and it was a conglomeration of, everything from the old Rattlesnake Dam to they just build out over time. And there comes a point where you have to sort of start over. Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's give one final comment here for questions. Again, we got some cards back there. We might go around here and get a couple of questions, but you can call them in to 406-546-7692. Question right there. Thank you. That one snuck up on me. Little comment that came in. Thanks for supporting the neighborways, and for the way you handled the recent homeless camps on our parks and that type of an issue. So there's a little compliment for you that just came in. That's a tough issue. We'll have to revisit that as we go into later in the summer, I'm sure, or in the fall. What's your hope, Mayor, for the future of Mountain Water? If you could just sort of look over the horizon, and you talked about it was real significant for you personally, but if you could look over the horizon, what would you like to see people be able to look at Missoula Water and be able to say about it in another decade or two?
Yeah. Well, I think the acquisition was important on day one. It was important that one day, 1 month, 1 year after the acquisition that the public owned and controlled the water supply. But it's significantly more important 50, 200, 500 years from now. That's when this is really meaningful. And as our climate crisis worsens, as we have larger swings in weather patterns, as we have less certainty in snowpack, in heat, in all of these factors that drive water supply and water quality, having our water under local control will always be a benefit, and that's the part that's meaningful. The other thing is that if you go to the Public Service Commission, it's a quasi-judicial proceeding. You have to be. It's not easy, and it's frequently not possible for everyday people to participate in water rate or in rate cases.
Rate cases, yeah.
Northwestern's got a really complicated, really significant rate case in front of the PSC right now that'll impact everyone in our community, every Northwestern customer in our community, which is most of the community. And in order to weigh in on that, you really have to have the specialized knowledge and the authorization to appear before the PSC.
You have to have standing.
You have to have standing.
Which is always interesting, yeah.
You don't have to have standing to go to the Missoula City Council chambers and express an opinion about water rates. You can come on down on a Monday night and you can talk about the water system, and you can talk about the concerns. You can talk, if there are water rates being decided, that happens here locally in downtown Missoula with people who live in the community, who you see in the grocery store, who are accountable to the community, and that's. They're not being made in a boardroom on the coast, ratified by the Public Service Commission, and that's a huge benefit for our community. Also, policy. Ross mentioned that we're looking at service line policies, and there may come a time when we want to change how we deal with homeowner service lines. That's something that will be of community interest and would be something where the community could come down and tell us how they feel about it.
I know that was one of the arguments that was made at the time, that some of the people, the critics of this acquisition, were saying, well, yeah, but what about all the leakage on the service lines? I think that the bigger discussion was, let's solve the big problems first. And now the city, from what Ross was saying, is able to go back and sort of get that under the ground look as you go along. Like, what does this neighborhood look like? What does this service look like? What other smaller mains might need attention in the future? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. The other thing that I think is fascinating with this, I want to ask you about it. People are very concerned about growth. We're going through this phase. You mentioned a little while ago about the amount of capacity we have with our water. Are there any concerns? I know the answer to this, but I'll ask for folks. Are there any concerns about us growing beyond what Missoula Water is capable of handling? And are we sort of keeping an eye on that gauge, if you will?
No, there's no concerns in that. I mean, obviously, water. There's a lot of news right now about subdivisions in Arizona that don't have water rights and don't actually have water, so there's a lot of really irresponsible building happening around the West. And again, we don't have those concerns here. We have ample water rights through the system, and we have a system in place to manage those rights. So like I mentioned earlier, we sometimes will go through an effort to transfer water rights from one area to another where growth is anticipated. There's a development right now in Lower Miller Creek where they're working on bringing in water rights that were previously associated with agriculture, and those will be essentially contributed to the city in order to support the development. And so there's things like that where we can require water rights to come on if the land contained historic water rights. We can manage the rights that we have. And the nice thing about our water rights in Montana or across the West are based on seniority, and our water rights are very senior. They date back.
They'll go the way back to Hellgate.
Yeah,
right.
They date way back
the original
to,
one.
absolutely,
on the creek. Yeah, on Rattlesnake. So, all right, we're going to open up any other questions. A couple of quick questions here. So, Carl, I'll give you a shot here. We're talking. I want to caution you. We are talking mountain water, so that's the topic for questions here tonight.
What would be the water rate if Cargill still owned the rights to the system at the rate that the repair bill would have been as it's going? What would have been the water rate right now if he still owned the system?
Well,
that's a good question. It's speculative, but what would that be?
That's a good question, Carl. It's difficult to speculate. I suspect that they would have gone forward for additional rate increases. Again, those water rate increases under the private ownership would go to the Public Service Commission, who would evaluate the rate and calculate that guaranteed rate of return that I mentioned that private utilities are allowed, and they would be allowed to recuperate their capital costs plus a guaranteed return on investment. And so the rates in 2014 were higher than our current rates. During the condemnation trial, the then owner was penalized, the private owner, and the Public Service Commission reduced their rates. And so we actually operated on those rates for a number of years that were a reduction. We have done one rate increase, but we're still below those 2014 rates. So they would have been higher. I don't know what they would be. It would all depend on what level of investment they were trying to do and how much profit and whatever else they were trying to wring out of the system, but they certainly would have been higher than they are now.
Given the history of surprises in that period, that decade, who knows, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I can remember the look on John Inget's face when all of a sudden the word came out and we figured out that the part of it had been assigned to Algonquin. And all of a sudden now we have to. What, the Canadians are involved? That was an interesting time. A lot of ups and downs as it went along. So. Any other questions that we have? Okay, we've got a pretty good audience here tonight, so appreciate your comments. I want to ask a couple other quick things that have come to mind as we've had our discussion, and thank you very much for your time. One thing is about growth in the surrounding area, and I think of maybe not so much the Bitterroot, as Lolo's a little far away to extend water service, but when I look out toward Frenchtown or perhaps even out toward East Missoula or Bonner or those kinds of areas where growth is happening. Are we in a position, or would we ever be in a position, to extend service beyond have Missoula County come in and say, hey, we have a serious water situation at Frenchtown or something like that? Has that been discussed?
Yeah, it's a continuing topic of discussion. It really doesn't make a lot of sense right now for a number of reasons. But we have extended sewer in certain cases. So there's sewer out at the Y, and that was a water quality situation where there were septic tanks and private wells, and there was, let's call it commingling, and the water quality was an issue, and so that the city extended, in partnership with the county and in partnership with environmental. I'm not sure if it was state or federal, but environmental agency. There was an extension of sewer main out to the Y, and that was because of that water quality issue. We have a development pattern that we try to accomplish in the city that is more compact, more predictable, more orderly, and more traditional neighborhoods, less cul-de-sacs, less leapfrog development, less suburban and exurban development. And so we try to utilize the utilities and our annexation policy to encourage and in some cases mandate that type of development pattern. It's not cost. Doesn't make sense from a cost standpoint to extend water mains out to parcels of one house on 1 acre out in Frenchtown. But it does make sense to extend it in a thoughtful way, in a methodical way, out toward the airport as the Setupkane area and the area behind Reserve Street fills in. That's an area where it makes a ton of sense to extend water. So we're thoughtful about it. We work very closely with our land use planners and with proposed development to make sure that we're providing utilities where we need them. We have actually what's called a utility service boundary that's set by council, and that's something that is sort of this is the mandated policy rule about where we will go, where we won't go beyond. And it does take council action to amend that and to provide utilities outside the utility
And that's
service.
where those discussions too with the county, or ongoing discussions, is very important. So you've got that dialogue open, right?
Yeah.
I think a lot of people don't realize what it costs to extend sewer and water. It's not like, and especially in our valley, you mentioned aquifers, of course, the rivers. There's a whole raft of issues you get into if you're trying to run water service across, underneath a river or something like that. So that's not something that's really common.
Even replacing a water main is multiple $1 million per mile, and Ross would have a much more precise number than that. But,
He's looking at Dale right now trying to get that number. Yeah.
We've just to put it in perspective, $400 a foot.
$400 a foot.
Yeah.
Wow.
So we've done 8.7 miles at a cost of $46 million.
So it goes up.
Yeah.
Well, Mayor, we appreciate your time. This is a fascinating topic, and certainly a nice sort of signpost to look back at how we got to where we were with Missoula Water. If people have ideas or concerns or questions about what's going on with Missoula Water, maybe the workers are coming into their neighborhood, what's the best way they can do to get that kind of information and feedback?
Yeah, so I mean, just for general information on projects in the community, our Engage Missoula website is a great place to get information about projects, about how to provide feedback on projects, and that's a really good informational resource. That's engagemissoula.com. Folks are always welcome to call either the water utility or just the main city number 552-6000, and that's a great place to get directed to information if anyone has specific questions or wants specific information. Again, that local government being accessible, I think, is one of the most important parts of this. I think the thing that is actually the takeaway I should have mentioned when you asked about it is that this is a story that is repeated over and over and over again of local government doing what they say they were going to do. So we said we're going to acquire the system and we're going to do X, Y, Z, and we've done X, Y, Z, and now we're planning what's next. And so it's a story of being accountable and being trustworthy and being good stewards of public resources, and that's something that I think our community can be proud of.
Well, I have to tell you, they haven't done a lot of water main work in my neighborhood because we're out in Miller Creek. Don't need it. It's newer. But the water does taste better. I have to say that. I can vouch for that. I used to, it's like, you'd open the tap and it's like, oh my gosh, what is this? Bottled water was huge. But it does taste a lot better over the last 6 years. I'll grant that. So
Good.
Yeah, that's a consumer report.
I don't know if that's placebo or not, but
I don't know.
Good.
It could be that. Maybe it's that. So, well, Mayor Jordan Hess, thank you for being with us again for another Wednesdays with the Mayor, and thank you all for watching. Again, if you get questions or comments or those kind of things, Engage Missoula is a great resource for all that type of information about the city, operations, not just the water system, but everything else that's going on as we continue to grow and develop here in Western Montana. Thanks for joining us tonight on Wednesdays with the Mayor.